So we continue. I say they had little choice, speaking of the Gentiles, they had little choice to rely on the interpretations of the extant Torah teachers and proto-rabbis of the day if they wished to obtain a peek into the scriptures that were micromanaged by Israel. Understand what I mean by that? Israel was the one who was safeguarding the Torah, in many cases guarding it so that Gentiles and pagans couldn't damage it or pervert it or mock it or what do we say? Dishonor God, pervert his name, and things like that. So Jewish people felt that it was their duty to kind of safeguard Torah, to preserve it and to keep it protected from harm, the harm of the paganism that was rampant in the first century, things like that. The Greco-Roman pantheon of gods and all the paganism and things like that permeated the first century. So Gentiles were viewed with suspect in many cases. They wanted to keep Torah, but the Jewish people kind of micromanaged their abilities to keep Torah. Okay, you can keep this part, but you can't keep this part because that part's for Jews only. Or we'll let you close. You can look, but you can't touch. But if you break it, you bought it. It was really kind of a stressful experience for your average Gentile. You want to bring a sacrifice, you got to do it proxy. You can't approach all the way as far as we can go. There's a barrier between us and you. Right? There's our court of the there's a court for Jews, there's a court for the women, there's a court for the Gentiles, talking about the temple. All of these kind of restrictions that were placed on people who were not deemed worthy to exist in this membership-only club, this kind of class or caste system that was a religious caste system that was being utilized by many of the Jewish people in the first century. Not all, but many of them. And so in closing for tonight, we're going to stop here. Just recall that in the case of Yeshua's teachings that were so radical to the ears of religious Jews and Jewish people that were listening and dialoguing and interacting with them today, is it necessary for them to interpret what Yeshua is saying as your worldview is completely corrupt and your way of life as a Jew needs to be replaced with a new way of life that's going to be labeled Christianity sooner or later? Your understanding of God's law and the law of Moses is going to need to be discarded and thrown out and replaced by a new law known as the New Testament, New Covenant, or it's going to eventually be called the law of Christ, etc., etc. The people of God, known as Israel, you guys are going to eventually be set aside, put on back burner status, or mothballed, or shelved, or whatever analogy you want to fill in the blank there. Replaced with a new people known as the Gentile Christians, because they're going to be faithful. They're going to be the people of God that take the gospel and go with it, whereas you people known as Israel, you're the unfaithful stewards. So God's going to rip the kingdom from you. God's going to rip the stewardship in the vineyard from you. You guys recall all the parables that Yeshua. So is this really the best way to interact with Yeshua's teachings? Or instead, as I purport, Yeshua is really teaching a radical transformation of the man, change of the heart, a change in the will and the volition. Surrender to Yeshua, surrender to God through Yeshua, and allow His Holy Spirit to take up residency within you so that you can actually take your beliefs about God and about Moses and about who you are as Israel and transform that into what God intended you to be all along, which is a Jew both outwardly and inwardly, where Paul talks about in Romans chapter 2 near the very end of the chapter. The Jew is one who's not one who's merely a Jew outwardly, and circumcision being of the flesh, and I'm paraphrasing, but a Jew is one who's also inwardly, circumcision of the heart, whose praise comes not from men, but from God. And with that, we'll conclude this section tonight on Judaism v. Christianity. Are Judaism and Christianity incompatible with one another?